It's a complicated picture. There's a very high degree of genetic loading for eating
Okay. What
disorders.
does that mean?
That means that there are genes that have been identified
Okay.
that can be passed down through the family. And, you know, I'm not the best person to dive into epigenetics, but I can
But you
say,
have an idea about it?
yes,
Yes.
enough
Yes.
that we can have these genes sort of laying dormant in our system. And any kind of an environmental stressor, be that an illness, be that a diet, be that a very, traumatic event or traumatic period,
Yeah, some big T trauma event
big
could
T trauma
trigger.
event,
Yeah.
or a series of little T trauma events,
Yes.
can flip that switch on, and that gene is active. So we know that eating disorders are as or more genetically determined than, say, Crohn's disease. There's a very
Interesting.
high degree of genetic
Okay.
loading.
Welcome back to Anchored Minds, the space where we dive into mental health, neuroscience, and the human experience. I'm your host, Lana. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer White, a registered social worker and psychotherapist who has spent nearly a decade specializing in eating disorder treatment. She's currently practicing at Paragon Psychology after many years working at the eating disorder team at the Teen Health site here in Windsor. Now, I know a lot of social workers, and this is my first time talking to one specializing in eating disorders. I'm really pumped to learn more. Jennifer is passionate about evidence-based care, supporting both individuals and families, and helping people reclaim their lives from eating disorders. She also consults, supervises, and speaks widely about adolescent development, body image, and mental health. I'm so glad to have her here to share her expertise and her heart for this work. Let's get into it. Hi, Jen.
Hi, thank you so much for having
Oh, I'm
me.
so happy to have you here. It's been so nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you too, and what a lovely space. Thank you so
Oh,
much for
thank
inviting me in.
you.
It's really an opportunity. Yeah.
So I've got a few questions for you, but definitely we'll just kind of like wing it and we'll go
Sure.
with it. Yeah, yeah. So we'll start off with the first question. I'd love to hear about your story. So, what pulled you towards working with young people and especially those navigating eating disorders?
Oh my, thank you so much for asking. It's it's a pretty simple story if I'm being honest. I was always wanting to work with teenagers because I feel like it's a stage in development where young minds have a lot of insight and they're starting to
Yes.
examine the world.
Young
But
adults and their brains are still
exactly.
growing, but they're in bodies of adults. And
Yes,
so,
exactly. Then there's just so much opportunity still
yes.
to turn a young person's life into a direction that's going to be meaningful, or to make the most out of any adverse circumstances that they've come across. It's just a very rewarding population, and I've always loved
Mm,
working with teenagers. And so when I went to graduate school, that was always my plan. And I was very
mhm.
lucky that my first internship was with the Teen Health Center, which was, on Olette at the time. I think they still
Yeah.
are, but we were in the old location. So I did a student placement there. And I absolutely loved it. I loved the population.
Mhm.
I loved everyone I worked with. I loved the environment. It was just such a great experience. And then, I went and did a second internship, and it was fine, but my heart was
Mhm.
still with the teens at the
Yeah,
Teen
and
Health Center.
there's just some populations that really you connect with. Like as social workers,
Yes.
we get to work with so many different populations, and they're unique in each of their own. They each all have great things about them, and so it sounds like teens are what you've been drawn to.
Yeah, it just, it clicked. And I had some criteria, as many of
Hmm.
us social workers do,
Yeah,
right? It's like, I would like everybody to be able to take care of their bodily
yeah,
functions, and,
sure,
and that can
sure.
rule out a lot in social
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
And
And then there's some
teenagers
people
fit
that
the bill.
really are like, no, I could like that. I
Yeah,
can,
and they're
yeah,
very good with that. And
yeah.
you have to know what your strengths are. You also have to know what your pitfalls are. And so teens were a natural fit. And so I did vow when I graduated that I would do whatever it took to get back there. And
And your kids are grown.
they're grown now. Yes.
Oh,
At the
okay,
time, they were pretty young.
okay,
So it was actually, I think I graduated in maybe 2008 or 2009 from my MSW.
okay.
So I had small children at the time. Um, So yeah, it's actually I've been working with eating disorders probably for close to 17 years now.
Long
Yeah, maybe
time.
16,
Yeah. Yeah.
something
So
like
you
that.
know a few things.
I do.
Okay.
I
So I've
do.
got another question for you.
Yeah.
So a lot of people do wonder about the difference between dieting, food struggles, and a true eating disorder. So how do you know when it's crossed the line?
Well, I mean, we have our diagnostic criteria, right?
Okay.
So there are a variety of different eating disorders. Most people are familiar with anorexia and bulimia.
Yes.
But we also have ARFID, which is similar to anorexia without the drive for thinness, or it's sort of known as extreme picky eating to the point that it causes health problems or health
Okay, so when it's
difficulties.
interfering with your health.
Yes, when it's interfering with your health or your ability to function socially.
Okay.
And we also have binge eating disorder. So those are kind of the broad categories that we work within. And generally speaking, dieting is not going to cause problems with your health or your social or emotional functioning. Um,
Yeah.
where an eating disorder is interfering with multiple facets of your life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So, and eating disorders can be so hidden. What are some early warning signs that families, teachers, or friends might want to pay attention to?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good question. Certain red flags, and again, we always kind of want to look at a basket of symptoms or, a
Yes.
basket of behaviors, and especially in eating disorder world, there are generally physical indicators that, whatever is going on has taken a negative impact on, the person's body and physical functioning. But things like, if a child is getting or a teenager is getting
Hmm.
sort of obsessive about certain things or not eating foods that they used to like or that they used to eat, with no
Okay.
problem. So denying favorite foods,
Hmm.
or if parents are noticing personality change, like a child who was once outgoing and pretty happy and even keeled,
Right.
becoming more isolated
Do you have
or
any stories
cranky.
that any clients that might come to mind that
Wow.
that
Pretty
they're
much all of them in some way, shape, or
yeah,
form. Yeah. I mean, your typical presentation would be, and I don't want to, we can talk a little bit about stigmas and stereotypes as
sure,
well.
yes,
But let's just say, we've got a kid who is, a competitive soccer player and they've always eaten well. They've always enjoyed food. They've been very
hmm
outgoing. They've got a good circle of friends. And then they just decide that they're going to make some steps to get healthier. And maybe initially they just start eating less fun foods. People might refer to them as junk food in eating disorder world.
fun
We
foods. I
refer to them
like
as
that.
fun
They are
foods.
fun foods. They
Fun
give you
foods.
dopamine. I like it. Yeah,
Exactly. It's like,
yeah.
the foods that you can eat sometimes, but we don't want to be eating all of the time.
Right, balance.
Balance, exactly.
Mhm,
But maybe, the child is just being more mindful about sugar or they're trying to have more fruits and vegetables. So early days, it doesn't look very problematic. But over
mhm,
time, maybe it starts with, they're eating less junk foods or fun foods, but then they're starting to cut out carbs. Then they're starting to cut out dairy or foods with fat in them. Maybe they're starting to read calorie labels. They're
mhm,
starting to count calories. They start to avoid social situations where people might be eating pizza and birthday cake, for example, or not wanting to go
mhm.
out with friends because their friends
Yes.
want to go to Starbucks and get, fun drinks and that sort of thing. So those are when and then in that process, oftentimes they're acting maybe a little bit more defensive.
Mhm,
If we start to ask that young person about why they're avoiding these certain foods, or maybe they should just have a piece of birthday cake and they get sort of angry or defensive or explosive, and that's out
yeah,
of character for that child,
yeah.
those are all things to be
And
worried
this is a
about.
really sensitive subject to talk to teens about because the body image and all the social media and there's so much influence out there with their peers and pressures as well.
hmm
So, what approach would you take to even talking to your teen about some of this and without blame or shame or identifying it as an eating disorder prior to the youth identifying it themselves?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked because it can be a very touchy subject.
Yeah.
And any parent of a teenager knows if we approach things the wrong way,
Yeah.
you might get your head bitten off a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we've all been there. It goes with the territory, right?
Right.
But I think especially anybody trying to talk to a loved one about their concerns about their
Mhm.
eating, we want to stick to the facts.
Okay.
So
So this is what I'm noticing. Tell me
yes,
more about that.
exactly. And you want to talk about specific behaviors or
Mhm.
specific instances or specific examples. We don't ever want to use shame or guilt
Mhm.
because, we can talk a little bit more about the eating disorder mindset or what's going on
Yeah. Tell me more
internally.
about that.
Sure. An eating disorder internal dialogue is very harsh and critical. So,
Mhm.
in working with families and kids, we always externalize the eating disorder. So, what I
Yeah.
mean by that is
That it's not you. It doesn't
exactly,
define you. So
exactly.
like in
Like,
narrative therapy, you might say eating disorder is separate from you. And so you can,
yes.
it doesn't define you and you don't have to be blamed by it.
Exactly, exactly. It's understanding that every client, every person that
Mhm.
experiences is a little bit different,
Yeah.
but any mental health disorder, the symptoms show up in relationships because,
Okay.
there's not a tumor that we can see on an x-ray or a break
Right.
we can see
Right.
on an x-ray.
Yeah.
Where the symptoms show up is in our relationships with ourselves, our relationship with the world, and our relationship with our loved ones. So, there are certain symptoms that show up: being defensive, being withdrawn, being cranky, any of these things. And when the loved ones take that personally and get angry, then, the client who's suffering with this will feel worse. They'll feel more guilt, they'll feel more shame. And what they're already experiencing is this harsh, critical voice telling them, you're not good enough. You have to do better. You need to be better than you are. You need to, look more perfect. You need to have a more perfect diet. So when people are using guilt or shame to try to
Yeah.
engage that client, you're actually causing them to withdraw even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when somebody is experiencing an eating disorder and they feel, they feel like they can't talk to anybody about it, what kind of things would you do to uh, engage your child a bit more? Like, do you change what you eat and just say everybody in the family is eating like this? Or what kind of more subtle ways without calling it out?
Sure. I mean, I guess would this be a scenario where there has been an identified eating disorder?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Yes. And so, like, perhaps parents are finding wrappers in a bedroom or,
mhm, mhm.
uh, just something that's happening secretly, but you don't want to say because you're like, I don't want to make it worse.
Well, I think any disorder like this
Hmm.
will thrive in secrecy.
Yeah.
So I understand parents handling things with kid gloves, but that always runs the risk of engaging in behavior that's actually codependent or allows more room and more latitude for the eating disorder. So I
Yeah.
always suggest get professional help.
Okay.
Go to the
Oh,
family doctor.
yes. Right.
Yes.
A third party person that
Yes.
is going to not have biases and not to be able to,
Throw the
yeah.
professional under the bus.
Absolutely. Let's
That
do
is
it.
what
Let's
we are
do it,
there for.
guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jen works at Paragon.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do, I direct our clientele locally here to
Mhm.
go to the Windsor Essex Community Health Center teen health site and get a medical assessment, and an
Okay.
eating disorder assessment. And you and I both know as MSWs, we can't diagnose.
No.
That's a protected act in the province of
Yes.
Ontario. But your local doctor can, or one of the nurse practitioners on the eating disorder team at the teen health center. They do a beautiful job of a very comprehensive assessment. And once that diagnosis has been given, or once we've got a
Okay.
very good
Okay. So
idea,
that's a great way to
yes,
start.
then
Absolutely.
that's how we start
Yeah.
because understandably, families who have been living with this for a
Mhm.
little while have become so gun shy because the topic of food at
Yes.
home, regardless of how delicately parents have tried to address this, has probably been quite fractious and, quite conflict laden. There tends, by the time families get to me, there's been door slamming and
Yeah.
stomping and, butting of heads. So one thing that I like to do is, we get the whole family in, we get on the same page, we externalize the eating disorder, we take the blame
Okay.
off of the child,
Nice.
and we
Right.
all work at coming together, going towards a certain goal, which is
Okay.
restoring the child to a state of health.
Yes.
Yes.
So are there some other factors that might influence, such as race or gender or sexual orientation, even, or athletics?
You know, it's this is a stigma that I feel has been so outdated for so long,
Hmm.
but we're having such a hard time turning the lens on this one.
Okay.
And
Tell me more about that.
and eating disorder can happen to anyone of any age, of any
Okay.
ethnicity, of any background, of any gender identity, of any sexual orientation. There's really eating disorders do not discriminate, but I have
Yeah. Thank you
found,
for clarifying that, because I
yes,
think that's really
it's
important.
really
That's a big
important.
message to send out there, that it doesn't just, it's not certain population, it's anybody who could be vulnerable to this.
Exactly. It's not just perfectionistic
Right.
white dancers and figure
Yes.
skaters. Like,
Yeah.
that's not
I mean,
who it is.
sure, it's there
It can
too.
be,
Yeah.
but we all live in Western society. We're all exposed
Yes.
to the
The
messages and the
pressures.
pressures.
Yeah. To look a certain way, to be able to wear clothes off the rack. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So families are such a big part of the recovery journey. From your perspective, what kinds of support make the biggest difference?
When we can get a family, and this does not have to be an intact family.
Hmm.
I've had divorced families who've worked together really, really beautifully, to support a child in their recovery journey. Any sort of chosen family can be really helpful. So for my young ones, it is typically the family of origin that I'm working with.
Okay.
So mom, dad, whether everybody's living together in the household or not.
Yeah.
If I've got grandparents who are supportive and they want to be involved in treatment, they are welcome into the room. We love to have them.
Right. The whole family constellation is
The
really,
whole
yeah.
family constellation, including siblings.
Perfect.
Siblings
Yeah.
know
They
everything.
do. They
They
probably know more
really,
than parents
they
do.
do. They do.
Yeah.
They're so valuable.
Yeah.
I love an
Involving
involved
them.
sibling. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're incredibly
Because they can
helpful.
also be like the cheerleaders, where sometimes parents are the authoritative person, kind of overlooking, and when you have a confidant
Yes.
that's under the same roof, that understands what's happening, I think
Yeah,
that'd
and
be,
understands the
yeah.
family dynamics, but maybe isn't
Yeah.
under quite the same lens, of eating disorder treatment.
Right.
Yeah, siblings can be extremely helpful. But for my older clientele, sometimes that support system looks like a spouse. Sometimes it looks like a friend or a family member who has been through an eating disorder or
Hmm.
who has experience with eating disorders and can approach with empathy and a non-judgmental stance. That
Yeah.
can be really helpful too.
Amazing. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I like that, because I think that we are a part of this whole family systems, and I really believe that,
Mhm.
we're our mind, body, the people around us, all of us, it's all interconnected.
It
And
is.
so,
Yeah.
uh, you know, eating disorders, when we think of them as related to food. So, is there other issues underlying, other than food, that eating disorders could be about?
Yeah, I think eating disorders are a necessary but maybe not sufficient condition to the entire picture.
Hmm.
One thing that it's important for people to understand is that
Hmm.
you cannot recover, as you said, family is so important.
Hmm.
Nobody recovers alone.
Okay. Yeah.
You need a whole community behind you and with you. Um, but also you cannot recover without repairing your relationship with food. And
Yes.
food is medicine. You must eat enough and eat a wide variety of foods and break all of those sort of like eating disorder rules
Right.
that eating disorder voice is, chirping in people's minds.
Yeah.
But we have a layering effect of susceptibility.
Hmm.
So it's a complicated picture. There's a very high degree of genetic loading for eating
Okay. What
disorders.
does that mean?
That means that there are genes that have been identified
Okay.
that can be passed down through the family. And, you know, I'm not the best person to dive into epigenetics, but I can
But you
say
have an idea about it?
yes,
Yes.
enough
Yes.
that we can have these genes sort of laying dormant in our system, and any kind of an environmental stressor, be that an illness, be that a diet, be that a very traumatic event or
Mhm.
traumatic period,
Yeah, some big T trauma event
big
could
T trauma
trigger.
event
Yeah.
or a series of little T trauma
Yeah.
events,
Yes.
can flip that switch on, and that gene is active. So we know that eating disorders are as or more genetically determined than, say, Crohn's disease. There's a very
Interesting.
high degree of genetic
Okay.
loading. So that's
Yeah.
something that, I do encourage families to be very cautious
So
about.
then the family history, that
Yes.
history taking is really important during your sessions.
It is, and it's important for families to know that if somebody, even oftentimes in the past, these things weren't diagnosed, but if there was somebody in the family that appeared to maybe not have a great relationship with food or eating, we don't want to let kids do things like go on any kind of a restrictive diet. Again,
Mhm.
that is an environmental stressor. That's a stress on the body going into a calorie deficit that can turn that gene on. So
Huh. Interesting.
no dieting for kids. No
Yeah, no
dieting for
dieting. Okay,
kids.
got it. No dieting
No
for
dieting for
kids.
kids.
Yeah.
And, the word dieting has now been cloaked in other terms
Right,
like
lifestyle change.
clean eating,
Yeah.
calorie deficit. All of these things are just fancy ways of saying dieting. Just because it's not Weight Watchers doesn't mean it's
No.
not dieting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, awesome. So, tell me about the recovery process because I think we know that it's not linear, it's not a straight line. So, what does that look like a journey for somebody? Is like, with addiction, there's relapse,
Hmm.
we actually have statistics on how often somebody relapses before they fully recover.
Hmm.
Is this something similar?
Yeah, in a way, it is that the journey tends not to be linear. It can
Hmm.
be. It can be. Another commonly held misperception is that, oh, once you have an eating disorder, you always have it and you never get over it.
Okay.
That's not actually true. If we catch the eating disorder in the first year, there's a 90% chance of, the eating disorder is caught and treated within the first year.
Okay.
There's a 90% chance of a long-term recovery. That chance of a long-term recovery goes down by about 10% per year, to where if somebody's had an eating disorder for 10 years and they're coming into treatment, we might not be looking at a full recovery for that person. If they
Okay.
come in after having this eating disorder in their life for 5 years, maybe we're looking at a 50-50 chance.
Hmm.
But it can look like we make a little bit of progress and then maybe there's a setback. Maybe a
What does that
client,
progress look like at the start? Like, how do you identify that there's been progress?
well, we have, and I'm just going to use
Yeah, use an
actually
example. We like stories.
both
Yeah.
of the best practice modalities really do focus on physical rehabilitation in the first phase of treatment. So that
Okay.
means eating more, eating regularly,
Changing that
managing,
relationship with
changing
food.
that relationship with food in a very physical way. So
Okay.
because the brain, if somebody has been restricting or if somebody's been restricting for long periods of time and then purging, the brain will be in crisis mode and it will be starved. So they're not going to benefit from the cognitive aspects of treatment until they're physically in a better place.
Okay. Yeah.
The brain is 20% fat.
Okay.
So, if the child is emaciated or the teenager is emaciated, they're not thinking very clearly. They're
No.
not going to have very good insight. So we really focus
So that
on
that would kind of be like the
physical.
beginning of the
Yeah,
the work. And then
exactly.
what's the middle part of the work?
The middle part of the work is understanding more about the cognitive and the psychological tools that we need to be
What
successful
about
long
that but
term.
where does it land where you have body dysmorphia or where you look in the mirror and you don't see yourself as you. You see another image that your brain has created.
That tends to get better as the relationship with food
Okay.
repairs. Now,
So that would be then an indicator of health. if you
Yes.
can look into that mirror and see a more realistic image.
Exactly, exactly. So in most cases that improves and corrects. It doesn't always. So in phase 2 and 3, with the clients where they continue with a very high degree
Yes.
of body dysmorphia in spite of being in a good place again, physically we know that they're medically stable and that their vitals are good and they're at a good weight for themselves. I just have to arm them with other tools that we do not believe everything we see, and there are certain kinds of strategies. Don't hang out in front of the mirror.
Yeah.
Don't, and
What other
this is
strategies?
for
Don't hang
everybody,
out. Yeah,
right?
I know. It's like I'm curious.
Do not
Yeah.
scrutinize. You
And
will
don't get on that scale every
don't
day.
get on the scale every
Yeah.
day. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Short-term fluctuations are more about hydration than they are about
Yeah.
weight. They really don't matter. It's the least interesting thing about you. Like, get off the scale, get out from in front of the mirror, know
What
what
about
your
your screen time? Are
oh,
we paring
yes,
down
some
that?
clients have to just take breaks from it or go off of it.
Mhm.
Know what your sort of comfort outfit is. If you're having a bad body image day, go to your comfort outfit, right? Or go to your plan B. Don't
Okay. So you have to have a plan B.
have a plan B. Don't spend all kinds of time changing. You're going to end up in the first outfit that you probably only somewhat liked in the first place. But the more you change, the more frantic and anxious and upset you're going to get. And then you're going to be leaving, for
Yes.
school or work
So
or
just
the
pre-plan
social
that.
event, exactly
Yes.
in a worse mood. Don't do that to yourself. Just put something on and leave the house.
Mhm.
So, also, we have to be educated about looking at
Mhm.
photos. Photos are 2D images. We're 3D people. We weren't
Yes.
really designed
And
to
photos are
be.
edited, and we don't edit in real
Yes.
life. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So, there are all kinds of little tips and tricks that we use to help people who continue to suffer
Yeah.
from body dysmorphia. And a lot of women can identify with, I have times of the month where I feel like
Oh,
my
gross, right?
ability to assess myself is pretty accurate. And I have other times of the month where my ability to assess myself goes completely out the window. And again, we have
Mhm.
to know what those are, and we have to be really compassionate with ourselves. If you're having a rough few days, be kind. Be
Yeah.
kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Wear things that are comfortable.
Mhm.
Don't be
And so that
critical.
self-talk is really important, it
It's really
sounds
important.
like. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
use what modalities do you use? Do you use CBT?
Yes. So for the
That's
young,
cognitive behavior therapy where you, change your thoughts, right?
yeah,
And
in
how you perceive the situation.
exact the best practice modality for young people is family-based therapy,
Mhm,
and
okay.
that is where the whole family works together. And the best practice modality for our typically transition age youth and adults is enhanced cognitive behavioral therapy,
Mhm.
specifically for eating disorders. So it is a manualized
Okay.
treatment that again has phases, and initially we're working on repairing our relationship with food. Then we're
Yeah.
repairing our relationships with our bodies and developing strategies to deal with anxiety and depression and all the other
Mhm.
stuff that maybe there's been some trauma in the past, right? Generally speaking, we want to stabilize the eating disorder before we move on to trauma
Yeah.
work.
And is this
Yeah.
years of work? Are people committing to a lifetime of work here, or can it be short term or depending on the individual, I would guess?
It depends on the individual,
Mhm.
but in my experience, you're looking at probably at least a year.
Okay.
And again, that's not a year every single week you're in my office,
No.
but a year before we know that you're probably going to be stable and able to move on with your life and leave this behind.
And during your sessions, during your phases, at what point do you sound the alarms? At what point are you saying you're safety planning with them around crisis situations? Do you do that at the start just in case it can creep up on you and surprise you at
It's
any
always part of
point?
the assessment.
Yeah.
And that's just something, as professionals, that we're always just keeping an eye on.
Mhm.
Because it can creep up at any time.
Right.
And we do
And what do
address
you
that.
say to somebody who's in crisis?
Now, crisis from a medically stable
Yes, from a medically
standpoint.
stable point where they are not well and they're going to either hurt themselves or their behaviors will end up in harm.
That depends on where we're at as far as, if we're talking about suicidality or if we're
Right.
talking about malnutrition.
Okay.
That kind of takes us in two different directions,
One
but
is more acute, would you say? And let's act now, or they're both can be quite emergent?
they both can be quite emergent.
Okay.
Again, in the province of Ontario, part of our best practices is that anybody with an acute eating disorder is also followed medically and followed
Yes.
medically regularly. So I cannot generally make the determination if somebody has to be hospitalized due to malnutrition,
Okay.
but I trust that my medical professionals that I
Do
work
you
with.
work with medical professionals in your hub of professionals?
Yeah, not within Paragon. We're only psychological services there, but I do
Okay.
have a small network of medical professionals that we liaise with, pretty
Yeah, you
routinely.
would need to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yes, absolutely. So I'm depending on those individuals to make the call
Okay.
if the person has to be sent to
Do you call
hospital.
them or do you tell your client, I gotta call your doctor, or how
Um,
does that work?
we generally have releases of information, so I'm oftentimes
Okay.
communicating directly with the professional, also so it doesn't burn my client out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one more thing for them to
Exactly.
do. You can
If they're not doing well physically and
Yeah.
mentally, they need me to advocate for them and go to bat for them on that level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This is such a complicated, like all these topics that we're talking about on my podcast are really big topics. And so it's nice to just be able to kind of, get a little bit of information out. And
Mhm.
then if you need to know more, that I can send you some links as well. So I'm going to wrap it up today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jen. I need my glasses to, to figure this part out. All right. So today we talked about a lot of things. And so we've got 3 takeaways for you. And so the first one would be eating disorders aren't just about food. They're complex conditions that touch emotions, relationships, and health in powerful ways. And number 2, I think this one's really important. Families matter. So when parents and caregivers are part of the healing process, recovery becomes much more achievable. And even siblings too, right? Not just parents
Yes.
and caregivers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And recovery isn't always a straight line, but with the right treatment and support, young people can take back control and thrive. So thank you so much, Jen, today for coming and sharing your expertise. It's been an honor having you on Anchored Minds. This was such an eye-opening and meaningful conversation. I hope it gave you a clear understanding of eating disorders and, most importantly, the hope that comes with recovery. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stood out for you today on this episode? Drop your questions and comments, and I'll be sharing some follow-up reflections in a future post. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with somebody who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss future conversations. This is Anchored Minds, where change happens with intention. Thank you.